My name is Guillermina, and I'm 34 years old. I didn't expect my mom's birthday dinner to be the night everything finally collapsed. But looking back, it makes a cruel kind of sense that it happened surrounded by candles, cake, and people pretending to be a family. I had almost talked myself out of going. My son didn't want to come, and that alone should have told me something. He stood in his room earlier that afternoon, holding the card he'd made for my mom, his fingers smudged with dried paint, asking me quietly if we could just drop it off and leave. I told him it would be fine, that it was Grandma's birthday, that sometimes you show up even when it's uncomfortable. I regret that now more than almost anything. The card had taken him 2 days. He'd worked on it in pieces, hunched over the kitchen table, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, layering colors carefully, because he didn't want to mess it up. He doesn't rush when he draws. He thinks before every line, like each one matters. By the time we arrived at my parents' house, he was clutching it to his chest like armor. Dinner started the way it always did. Too loud, too many opinions, too much pretending. My sister was already holding court, her son Ryan glued to her side like a trophy. Ryan has always been the star of this family. Loud, confident, quick with insults that get mistaken for charm. Ever since he was little, people laughed at whatever came out of his mouth, and no one ever told him to stop. My dad especially loved it. He'd beam like he'd personally raised a future celebrity. The cake came out, candles lit, phones lifted for photos. That was when Ryan reached across the table, grabbed my son's card, and before I could even process what was happening, crumpled it in his fist and shoved it straight into the frosting. Chocolate smeared across the drawing, thick and sticky, like it was part of the joke. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, clear as day, nobody likes his weirdo art. The table burst out laughing. That's the part that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. Not Ryan's words. Kids can be cruel, not the card or the cake. It was the sound of everyone laughing together, like this was a punchline they'd been waiting for. My sister actually clapped. Her husband slapped the table. My brother muttered something about my son being sensitive. And my dad, sitting at the head like a king watching his court perform, smiled. Nobody looked at my son. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just froze. I saw it happen in real time, the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his face went blank like he'd shut something off inside himself. He stood up slowly and walked out of the room without saying a word. I started to follow him, my heart pounding, but my dad raised his hand like I was interrupting something important and said not to cause a scene. I looked around the table and realized I was the only one who hadn't found it funny. My mom was already trying to redirect things, lighting the candles again, telling everyone to smile for pictures. I stood in the hallway just out of view and listened to them sing Happy Birthday while my son stayed upstairs alone. I didn't make him come back down. When we finally left, he went straight to bed at home without eating, curled around his sketchbook like it was the only safe thing left. He didn't say a word. Around 10 that night, my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. Maybe skip Christmas. You're bringing the mood down. I stared at it for a long time, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I'd been trying not to name. This wasn't about a birthday or a joke gone too far. This was about years of knowing exactly where we stood in this family. Ryan has always been the favorite. Always. From the time he was 3 and repeated something from a beer commercial that made everyone laugh, my dad started calling him the star. The rest of us were just extras in Ryan's show. Especially my son. Especially the quiet kid who liked drawing animals more than playing rough. Who thought before he spoke. Who didn't perform for approval. They never knew what to do with him, so they turned him into a joke. The first time I realized how deep it went, Ryan was 5. He threw a hard plastic dinosaur at my son's face and split his lip open. My son was 3. He cried, blood running down his chin, and Ryan laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. My sister barely reacted. My dad chuckled and said, "Boys will be boys." That line followed Ryan everywhere like a permission slip. When he erased a drawing my son worked on for hours and replaced it with a stick figure vomiting, they called it a prank. When he hid my son's stuffed fox at a family cabin and made him cry before bed, my mom said maybe he should stop bringing baby toys. When Ryan made a TikTok mocking my son's speech and it got hundreds of likes, my dad shared it on Facebook with laughing emojis. And somehow I was always the problem. Too sensitive, too reactive. I needed to relax, lighten up, take a joke, My sister would say Ryan teased because he liked him. My dad would nod like that settled it. When I said it wasn't teasing, it was bullying. They'd change the subject or leave the room. Silence was easier than accountability. After the birthday, I waited. I didn't expect a grand apology, but I thought maybe someone would check on my son, ask if he was okay, acknowledge what happened. No one did. Instead, the family group chat filled with blurry pictures of cake and candles, like the night had gone perfectly. My mom even posted a photo online with the caption, "Family is everything." That Sunday, my son told me he didn't want to go to art class anymore. He said, "I think it's stupid now, like everyone else thinks." I told him that wasn't true, but he just shrugged and went back to drawing alone in his room. That hurt more than anything they said to me. Art was the one place he felt proud, and they'd crushed it over a cake and a laugh. When I stopped the mortgage payment that night, it wasn't impulsive, it was overdue. I'd been quietly sending $3,000 a month for over a year and a half. When my dad lost his job and my mom's health issues got worse, I stepped in. Mortgage, groceries, utilities, the whole thing. My sister chipped in a couple hundred now and then, usually with complaints. My brother bailed entirely. No one ever thanked me. No one ever asked how I was managing it as a single mom. It was just understood. Guillermina handles it. Guillermina fixes things. Standing in my kitchen, staring at that text telling me I was bringing the mood down, something finally snapped. I turned off my phone and went to bed. When I woke up, I had 48 missed calls. When I woke up the next morning and saw the wall of missed calls, I didn't feel panic. I felt tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. 16 from my dad, 9 from my sister, several from my mom, and even a few from my brother, which was how I knew things were serious, because he never called unless he thought he might be asked to help. I didn't call anyone back. I made coffee, packed my son's lunch, and watched him sit at the table drawing in silence, his sketchbook pulled close like a shield. By noon, the family group chat exploded. Not with apologies, not with concern for my son, but with carefully worded messages designed to sound reasonable. "We're all exhausted," one aunt wrote. "Don't make this about money," another chimed in. "Ryan's just a kid, Guillermina," my sister added, as if that erased everything. Not one message mentioned the card. Not one asked how my son was doing. It was like he'd never been there, like the humiliation was a minor inconvenience they could scroll past. That's when it finally hit me that the mortgage wasn't the real issue. The money was just the leash. What they were really upset about was the idea that I'd stopped responding on command. For years, I had been the quiet solution, the one who paid late fees before anyone noticed, the one who fixed accounts, transferred funds, made sure the lights stayed on. They didn't see it as generosity. They saw it as infrastructure, like plumbing, invisible until it broke. The first time I realized how deep that expectation ran was years earlier, when my dad casually asked if I could just put the utilities in my name because my credit was better. It would be easier, he said. Temporary, he promised. Then the subscriptions got added. Then the insurance. Then the car registration. It all piled up slowly, quietly, until their stability rested on my silence. I told myself I was doing it for my mom, for family, for peace. What I was really doing was teaching them I'd absorb anything. When my mom finally called that afternoon, she didn't ask how we were. She didn't bring up the cake or the card. She just said she'd noticed the mortgage hadn't gone through and wanted to make sure it was a mistake. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, like this was a technical issue we could solve together. I told her it wasn't a mistake. She paused, then said, "But that's your father's house." I said, "And that's my son you all laughed at." The silence on the other end was heavy. Then she asked the question that told me everything. "So what are we supposed to do now? Not I'm sorry, not we messed up, just logistics." That's when I realized they didn't see my help as a choice. They believed I owed it to them, that my role as the fixer was permanent, regardless of how they treated me or my child. I hung up and went back to my day. By Thursday, I started getting automated emails from the mortgage company, past due notices, friendly warnings that would soon turn less friendly. I wasn't on the deed, but the account was still tied to me, and they knew exactly how to phrase things to make me uncomfortable. My dad left 2 voicemails pretending to be calm, asking if I wanted to come over and talk. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. Accusations, disrespect, family loyalty, how dare you. Then came the final text that week. You're really going to do this to us over a kid being a little too honest." I didn't reply because it wasn't about the birthday anymore. It was about every time they'd watched my son shrink in their presence and called it personality. Every time they protected Ryan like he was untouchable and treated my son like collateral damage. They had chosen their favorite over and over again and expected me to keep paying the price. By the time the second mortgage payment failed, I had already removed my name from the auto-pay system entirely. They didn't notice right away. They were used to the money just appearing, the house staying warm, the fridge staying full. My silence was probably assumed to be compliance, but this time, it wasn't. On the 5th day, the calls started ramping up. My dad, my sister, my mom, then calls from my niece's phone, my aunt's number, even a restricted line. I ignored them all. I didn't block anyone. I wanted them to see that I was choosing not to answer. That silence could be intentional too. My brother finally texted, "You're seriously doing this. Just let it go already. Ryan's a kid. You're the adult." I saved that message, not to use against him, but to remind myself how completely they missed the point. They still thought this was about one night. They didn't understand that the moment with the cake wasn't the beginning, it was the end. That night, I took my son out to dinner, just the two of us. He brought his sketchbook and drew quietly while we waited for our food. At one point, he showed me a drawing of a waiter carrying 3 trays at once and said he was practicing people now, not just animals. I asked why. He shrugged and said, "Because someday I want to draw the whole world, and I don't want to leave anyone out." I swallowed hard and smiled, because I knew exactly who had always been left out. When we got home, I went through every account, every bill, every thread that tied my life to theirs, and started cutting them one by one, not in anger, in clarity. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I was protecting my child and myself from a system that had never cared how much it took from us. They thought I was punishing them. I was finally choosing us. I didn't announce anything. That was the part they never understood. They expected yelling, ultimatums, a dramatic speech they could mock later. Instead, I moved quietly, the way you do when you've already made peace with a decision and don't need anyone else's permission. While they argued in the group chat and left voicemails that swung between outrage and wounded pride, I opened my laptop and did what I'd been doing for them for years, only this time in reverse. First, I froze the shared credit cards, every single one. My sister's gas card, my mom's grocery card, the one my dad used for prescriptions. They were all in my name because it had been easier that way, easier for them. I used to think that meant they trusted me. Now I knew it just meant they assumed I'd never say no. Next, I logged into the utility portals. Water, electricity, internet, garbage, insurance. All of it had been set to auto-pay from my account, month after month, quietly draining me while they joked about how I was so good with money. I revoked every auto-pay and removed my name where I could. Then I moved to the subscriptions, streaming services, music plans, family cloud storage, devices I'd never seen logged into accounts I'd been paying for because no one ever asked. They just added themselves. In less than 10 minutes, years of invisible labor disappeared. The timing was almost cinematic. I didn't plan it, but part of me knew exactly when the cracks would show. Around dinner time, my phone buzzed with the first confused text. The Wi-Fi went out. Someone complained the router must be dying again. Then the lights flickered. My sister asked if anyone had touched the breaker. My dad said he'd call the utility company tomorrow. The fridge beeped loudly with a power fault, the kind of sound designed to force action. Then the pharmacy app sent a notification about a failed prescription renewal. That was when panic set in. They didn't come at me immediately, not at first. They accused each other. My sister blamed my dad. My dad blamed my mom. My mom blamed the bank. Everyone talked at once, voices overlapping in that familiar chaos of people who had never planned for consequences because they assumed someone else would catch them. When that didn't work, when nothing magically fixed itself, their attention turned to the one place it always did, me. My sister texted, "What did you do?" My mom called, her voice tight, asking if something was wrong with my account. My dad left a voicemail telling me to stop being dramatic and fix it. None of them asked why. None of them apologized. They still thought this was a tantrum, a bluff, something that would end once they applied enough pressure. By dessert time, the reality had sunk in. Cars wouldn't start because insurance apps had logged out. Banking apps wouldn't load. Someone swore loudly when a card was declined at the gas station. The family group chat filled with frantic messages, screenshots of error notices, accusations disguised as questions. That was when my sister finally said it out loud. "This isn't funny." It wasn't meant to be. When they realized nothing was coming back online, the tone shifted. Anger replaced confusion. My dad accused me of being vindictive. My sister said I was punishing everyone over a joke. My mom tried fear, warning me not to make enemies in my own family. They still didn't understand. They thought I was teaching them a lesson, proving a point. They didn't see that I wasn't negotiating anymore. By the end of the night, they left the house in pieces. Not together. Not united. Angry, confused, and rattled. I stayed home, finished my coffee, and watched the quiet settle in. For the first time in years, the weight lifted just enough for me to breathe. The next morning, they didn't call to apologize. They showed up. They didn't come together, which was how I knew they were scared. My mom rang the doorbell first, standing on the porch with her purse clutched in both hands like she was bracing for impact. Less than 5 minutes later, my dad's truck pulled into the driveway, gravel crunching under the tires like an announcement. I watched through the window for a moment longer than necessary, letting the scene settle, letting myself remember that I didn't owe them immediate access anymore. When I opened the door, they didn't waste time pretending this was a visit. "Your mother's medication didn't go through," my dad said immediately. Not hello, not how are you, just a problem they expected me to solve. My mom nodded beside him, eyes already wet. "The pharmacy says the card was declined," she added, voice trembling just enough to sound fragile. She stood there waiting, the way she always did, like I would reach for my phone and fix it before the panic could spread. "It wasn't a mistake," I said. They froze. My dad frowned, genuinely confused, like I'd started speaking a language he didn't recognize. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Just restore the cards. You made your point." That sentence told me everything. They still thought this was a lesson, a warning, a momentary lapse in my usual role. "It never was a point," I said quietly. "It was a boundary." My mom stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was negotiating with a child. "We need to settle this today," she said. "You don't want to make enemies in your own family." The threat was wrapped in concern, the same way it always had been. I felt the old reflex twitch, the instinct to smooth things over, to make it easier for everyone else, even if it cost me. I let it pass. "I'm not settling anything," I said. "You should leave." They didn't yell. That surprised me. They looked at each other, uncertainty flickering across their faces like a realization they hadn't prepared for this version of me. My dad muttered something about arrogance, about how I didn't treat parents this way. I met his eyes. "I usually let my parents treat me however they want," I said. "That's what's changing." They left quieter than they arrived, confusion replacing confidence. I knew it wasn't over. Families like ours never stop at the first refusal. That night, my sister made it public. A vague post about betrayal, about how money turns people cold. No names, just enough bitterness to invite commentary. Aunts chimed in with sad emojis and prayers. I didn't respond. I documented everything. The next day, HR called me in. Someone had sent an anonymous email questioning my professionalism, implying I was unstable and misusing resources. It was sloppy and obvious, but the intent was clear. They were willing to reach into my livelihood to pull me back into line. HR checked everything and found nothing. They apologized. I thanked them and went back to work, hands steady, chest tight. That evening, a new notification hit my phone. A microloan had been opened under a family account once linked to mine. $4,000. High interest. Short term. I didn't need to ask who did it. They assumed this would force my hand, that I'd rush to clean it up like always. I printed the notice and set it on the counter, letting it sit there like a test I was finally ready to fail on purpose. Days passed, then weeks. When they came back, they looked different. Not angry. Not demanding, tired. My mom held out an envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a receipt showing the loan paid in full, cash. They'd sold the dining room table to do it, the one thing they'd always treated like sacred. For the first time, they'd had to give something up instead of asking me to. I'm not your emergency exit anymore, I said. If you want any future contact, stay out of my life. They nodded. They left. And the silence that followed felt real. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. They paid off the loan, nodded like they finally understood, and disappeared into the kind of silence that usually meant they were regrouping rather than retreating. For a few days, nothing happened. No calls, no text, no vague posts online. The quiet felt unfamiliar but not unwelcome, like the house after a storm when you're still listening for the wind to come back. Then my phone buzzed with a notification I almost ignored. It was from a credit monitoring app I'd signed up for years ago and rarely checked because I never needed to. The alert was brief but precise. A new balance had posted on a joint credit card tied to my name. I opened the details and felt my stomach drop. Over $6,000, most of it charged in the last 3 months. Restaurants, online orders, a casino weekend, a hotel stay, and one line that made my hands start to shake. Ryan's grad suite. Ryan was 13. What graduation even warranted a suite? I stared at the screen, my mind racing backward through every financial thread I thought I'd already cut. Years ago, when my dad was out of work and everything felt like it might collapse, I'd co-signed a card just for emergencies. He'd promised it would stay at a low balance. I'd checked it occasionally back then, kept it paid off, and eventually forgot about it when things stabilized, or when I thought they had. They hadn't forged my signature. They hadn't hacked anything. They'd just used the access I never thought they'd abuse this blatantly. When I called the credit company, the woman on the line was polite and thorough. She explained that because there was a long history of shared use, the charges weren't automatically flagged. Legally, my name was still on the account. That meant I wasn't just connected to the debt. I was responsible for it. I had 2 options: pay it and move on, or dispute it as fraud and let the process unfold. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call ended. My son was in his room drawing, humming softly to himself, unaware that the family he barely spoke to anymore was still reaching into our lives. There was a time when I would have paid it without hesitation, just to make the problem go away, just to protect my credit, just to avoid another round of chaos. That instinct was still there, whispering that it would be easier. Instead, I called a lawyer. Not to threaten them, not to negotiate, to audit everything, every account, every bill, every document that had ever linked my name to theirs. What we found was worse than I expected. 2 utility bills, still active at their house in my name, internet and water. An old hospital bill, where my mom had used my insurance card for a routine appointment because she didn't want to pay the copay. And then the one that made my lawyer pause, a refinance application from 4 months earlier. They hadn't forged my signature, but they'd inflated their household income using deposits I'd made in the past, making it look like I still supported them. It borders on financial misrepresentation, my lawyer said carefully. That was the moment something in me hardened for good. This wasn't about family tension or hurt feelings anymore. This was about protection. For me. For my son. I sent cease and desist letters to every agency involved. I locked my credit. I removed myself from every remaining shared account. I switched insurance providers. I froze anything that could be touched. It took days of paperwork and phone calls, but when it was done, there was nothing left for them to grab onto. That's when my mom showed up again. She stood on my porch holding a box, her face carefully neutral, the way it always was when she was trying to control a situation. I opened the door just enough to make it clear she wasn't coming in. She said the box had old photos, cards, things from when I was little that she thought I might want before everything changed. Her voice was calm, too calm. I told her to leave it on the porch. She nodded like she'd expected that. Before she left, she said quietly, "You're not the only one hurting. We're family. That used to mean something." I didn't answer. I closed the door. Inside the box were photos, just like she said. Beach trips, birthday cakes, smiling faces that didn't match the reality I remembered. And then I found the letter, folded and tucked between 2 frames. My dad's handwriting was unmistakable. He wrote that I'd made my point, that this was the last stunt they'd tolerate, that family doesn't abandon family. He wrote that I'd walked away, not them, and that I shouldn't expect them to wait around when I decided to come crawling back. The last line made my chest feel hollow. "You'll come back. They always do." I sat on the floor reading that line over and over, realizing how certain he was that I'd eventually break, that I'd snap back into place like I always had. He didn't know that something fundamental had changed. I wasn't bending anymore. 2 days later, I got a notification from a GPS app I'd forgotten was still active. The car. The old Honda I'd given them when their van died. It was still registered and insured, under my name. The location pinged 20 minutes south near a small repair shop I didn't recognize. I called the towing company. They hadn't moved it, which meant my dad had taken it. He still had the spare key. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I went straight to the police. The car was mine on paper. When the officer asked if I wanted to press charges, I said yes, not out of anger, out of necessity. If I didn't draw a line now, they would never believe one existed. Within 24 hours, the car was found behind a friend's body shop. The messages exploded the moment my dad realized the police were involved. My mom begged me to drop it, said it was a misunderstanding, said I'd embarrassed him. My sister sent half threats. My brother asked what the hell was wrong with me for pressing charges against our own father. Then my phone buzzed with a voice note from an unfamiliar number. It was Ryan. 30 seconds. That's all it took. He said he didn't know why everyone was acting like it was such a big deal. He said I was always overdramatic. He said maybe if my kid wasn't so weird, none of this would have happened. I listened once. Just once. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer. That was the moment I knew there was nothing left to salvage. After I sent Ryan's voice note to my lawyer, I didn't feel the rush of victory people imagine comes with final proof. I felt clarity. Clean, sharp, unavoidable clarity. That recording wasn't just another insult. It was the distilled truth of everything my family had defended for years. They weren't protecting a child who made mistakes. They were protecting cruelty because it entertained them, because it kept the hierarchy intact, because it meant someone else would always be smaller so Ryan could feel bigger. The police process moved forward quietly. My dad avoided charges only because the car was recovered quickly and returned without damage, but the warning was formal and on record. The message landed harder than any argument I could have made. He stopped calling. My mom stopped pleading. The chaos that used to surround them like noise finally went still, not because they understood, but because they knew I would no longer absorb the fallout. 2 days after the car was recovered, an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a copy of a new will. Not a letter, not an explanation. A legal document. My name was gone. My son's name was gone. My sister and brother remained. Ryan's name appeared prominently, complete with education funds and vague language about legacy. At the bottom, a line explained the update reflected current estrangement and repeated disrespect. I read it twice and set it down without emotion. I hadn't wanted their money. I'd wanted them to see my child as human. They chose otherwise. That choice was theirs to live with. Later that week, my sister posted a photo of Ryan standing beside my dad in front of the fireplace, both holding matching mugs, smiling like nothing had ever cracked. The caption read, "Legacy in the making." I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The word legacy had never sounded more hollow. I called a lawyer the same day, not to contest the will, not to fight for anything I didn't want, but to secure what mattered. I put airtight plans in place for myself and my son. A living trust, a power of attorney, clear guardianship instructions. I wasn't leaving any openings for anyone to step into our lives and rearrange them again. Protection isn't dramatic, it's meticulous. The next surprise came from a number I didn't recognize. A video, no caption. It was Ryan again, walking through my parents' living room, holding the box of photos my mom had dropped off. One by one, he tossed them into the fireplace, staring straight into the camera as they burned. I watched it once, felt the heat of it in my chest, then forwarded it to my lawyer. Cruelty documented is still cruelty, no matter how casually it's delivered. Months passed after that. The house my parents lived in went up for sale. I heard it through someone else. The refinance had failed. Without my monthly payment, the math finally caught up. I got a voicemail from my mom weeks later, slow and careful, asking for temporary help, talking around the truth like it might soften if she didn't name it. I deleted it halfway through. I already knew the end of that sentence. The last message I ever sent to the family chat was simple and final. Since everyone is so concerned with legacy, you're free to build yours without my money, my help, or my name. This is the last message you'll receive from me." Then I left the group and blocked every number. Silence followed, real silence this time, not the kind loaded with threats or manipulation, just absence. At home, things changed in ways I hadn't expected. My son started drawing people again. He pinned his sketches to the fridge. He made cards, but only for people who earned them. One night he handed me one with 2 owls on a branch. Underneath he'd written, "Some people leave, some people stay. I'm glad you stayed, Mom." I held that card longer than I held any inheritance document. I didn't lose a family. I stopped financing a hierarchy that needed someone small to survive. I didn't choose money over people. I chose a child over a pattern. I chose quiet over cruelty. I chose to protect the one thing they never would. They can keep their house, their stories, their favorite. We kept our peace. And for the first time in a very long time, the house is warm, the walls are covered in art, and no one laughs when someone gets hurt.